Okay. Our moderators. Suzy DeYoung has had a long career as a television producer, advocate, and researcher. She was the producer and co-host of the Aviel Foundation's Brainstorm Experience speaker series here in Newtown, which focused on issues pertaining to mental and brain health. Shull has built a successful career as an IT professional and has recently trained to be a civil rights auditor. Lee is an advocate against violence and building healthier communications, which led him to the creation of Sandy Hook Promise and the Sodina project within the Aviel Foundation. So now, please welcome Suzy DeYoung and Lee Shull.
So many faces. Welcome to the 5th in Newtown Speaker Series. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to a few people behind the scenes without whom we would not be here this evening. Lauren DiMartino, our business manager, Whitney Gianelli, Phil Keane, our photographer, who is photographing and videotaping our event tonight. He is from Blue Sky Farm Productions. Our operations manager, Anthony Sartori, our technical director, Grant Ossendriver. Thank you, guys.
Welcome everybody, and just a reminder to submit questions, use the QR code in your program. Now's the time to ask questions during the show because the book signing, because of so many people, we'll need to move quickly. So I wanted to take a moment to remember and acknowledge the Aviel Foundation for a few reasons tonight. Jennifer Hensel and Jeremy Richmond, Aviel's parents, are scientists and created the idea for the Aviel Foundation in the hours after their daughter was murdered at Sandy Hook School. They pushed for the use of the term brain health instead of mental health as a way to demystify the word mental, and also at the same time reducing barriers for those folks to seek help that might prevent people from seeking help. You see, our brain is our most complex organ in our body, and it can become ill just like any other organ in our body as well. So, not many are aware of it, but Jennifer was the force behind that term, and in fact, the discussion around the use of that term ended up securing their initial seed funding that was able to launch the Aviel Foundation. And although the Aviel Foundation is not front and center in our community as maybe as it used to be, but the funding of the brain health research continues as part of the University of Colorado's Anschutz School of Medicine. And Jen is very much involved in an advisory capacity with the Aviel Initiative at the University of Colorado. We also would not be here if not for the Brainstorm Experience speaker series, which was part of the Aviel Foundation as well. Also this week marks 6 years since Jeremy's passing by suicide. And the last point on this is much of Tara's story tonight, or the story in Educated, centers around brain health, both in terms of what she and her family members experience either directly or indirectly.
Now for our guest. Tara Westover was born in Idaho, the youngest of 7 children, and raised at the base of a mountain called Bucks Peak. Tara describes her father as an ideologue and a sectarian wholly devoted to his singular religion. She was raised to believe that the government was corrupt, that public education was brainwashing, and that doctors and hospitals and pharmaceuticals were profane and godless. Thus, she and most of her siblings were never put in school, instead educated at home according to her father's beliefs.
Nonetheless, she went on to become an American historian and memoirist. Her book, Educated, a memoir of her upbringing, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and remained on the list in hardcover for more than 2 years. The book was also a finalist for a number of national awards and has been translated to 49 languages. The New York Times named Educated one of the 10 best books of 2018, and Time Magazine named her one of the most 100 influential people. Tara Westover holds a PhD in intellectual history from Trinity College, Cambridge, and in 2019 she was Rosenthal Writer in Residence at Harvard University. In 2023 she was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Biden.
Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the stage, Tara Westover. Being here with us tonight. Welcome to Newtown.
Thank you for having me.
I want to first ask you, your book came out 7 years ago, right?
That's true.
And
that feels true.
You haven't written another book since.
Way to start with a painful question.
No, I'm sorry.
Whose side are you on?
I'm on your side. The popularity is huge. We've sold out tonight. This book resonates so deeply with people. I'm wondering why. Why do you think it has hit such a chord in so many people?
I have no idea. I mean, when I was writing it, I guess I think unless you have some kind of clinical issue, assume that your own life is going to be interesting to you. You know, and I remember when I was writing it, sort of thinking this book is going to do so well with like girls who were kept out of school and then went to Cambridge, and then they're going to love this book. They're going to be so into it, and had a junkyard, and like they're going to love this book. And yeah, it felt like a pretty specific story. It didn't feel like something that a lot of people would really identify with. And as I have written it, and then once you create something and you publish it, you also then become its sort of shepherd. You shepherd it through the world, and you go and you speak to people, and you try to explain why you did it and what it is. And I meet a lot of people who say that they identify with the story, and I meet a lot of people who say, oh, I also didn't go to school, and I also worked in a junkyard, and more than you would think. There are those people. But I love it when someone says that to me. It's like, I grew up on the Upper East Side. My dad's a dentist, and I think. I don't know, I think the universal often does come out in this specific, and a lot of people, I think, aspire to change their lives, either through education or something else, and a lot of people struggle with difficult decisions about family and family dysfunction, and how do you navigate a family where maybe loyalty to your family is coming at some expense to loyalty to yourself, and what do you do in that situation? So I think it might be those two themes. All jokes aside, I think it's probably those two things.
Is that what you mostly hear from people?
I mean, I hear all kinds of things, but I feel like that was the thing when I named it Educated. That was the thing I was trying to capture, which is all the complication. That's a very loaded word, educated, and all the complication that comes from aspiration and change. And I think if I hadn't left, a lot of my ideas wouldn't have shifted so much. And one of the ideas that shifted for me was, I had this older brother. He had a lot of psychological problems. He had some brain health problems, we could say. And when I was growing up, it's not like I thought it was all right, but it was the world as I understood it, and I wasn't going to rock the boat, and then you go out into the world and you start to develop opinions, and that can cause problems.
Definitely.
So education, obviously very important to you, and there were people who believed in you, supported you, pushed you, applying for grants, etc. Can you talk about your opinion about the importance of every child having access and opportunity to an education?
If I could, I just wanted to, there was something you wrote in 2022 that I thought was such
I did write something else.
In the New York Times, you're not an example of the American dream.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a quote in there that I wrote down because I loved it. If I can read it before you answer the question. We have allowed the inequities of our economic system to be reproduced in our education system. And that is the result, and that result is poisoning our politics. We then ask ourselves why so many Americans no longer believe in college or degrees or facts or science, why they perceive education as not for them, but rather as a good distributed by the elites to elites. So, yeah.
I mean, I think education it's a very amorphous thing, and it's good that it's amorphous. We don't I'd like to think of it as access to a lot of different points of view. It's just access to information and good teachers and people, and yeah, I get concerned when education doesn't just differ, when it differs so much in quality that it becomes almost like a totally different thing. And I think technology is a really interesting, there's some interesting questions we have to ask ourselves about how technology is going to change education. And in a way, I think it's amazing that it's going to be possible for any kid anywhere with a computer or phone to hear the best mathematician in the world give a lecture on mathematics. I mean, what an incredible thing. And that's great. The flip side of that I worry about is that you might create a world where wealthier children get teachers and classrooms and interactions with students, and everybody else gets YouTube, and that is, so I think sometimes our instruments of addressing inequality can also become problematic in themselves if that's the only thing that we think education is. So I don't know. I forgot what the question was. What was the original question?
I think.
Did I get it?
I think so. The importance of every child having access and opportunity to an education.
And
Yeah.
you've said that a lot of young people don't have the access that you did today. That it's very.
Oh
good.
yeah. Well, I wrote that op-ed. I wrote it. I went to Brigham Young University, and at the time, it was just, it's still pretty inexpensive, but it was so inexpensive. I think, if I remember correctly, tuition was $1,600 a term, and it had at the time, I know, right? And it had an academic ranking, I think, around where Rutgers, it's a good school, and it was not expensive, and you could sort of clean toilets in the engineering building and pay your way. I did that, and that's how I did it, And I wrote that up because my whole life was about money. I took the 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift because it paid $1 more an hour. Like, this was the way everything was about money. And and I think one of the nice things when you get older and you have money is you don't have to think about money quite as much, but when you're poor, it's all you think about. And it was very difficult for me to focus on learning because I was so focused on rent,
Yeah, there was one of the questions I had was at one point when you had a problem with your tooth, and you needed $1,400, and a grant came and it was for $4,000, and you said, "Oh wait, I don't need all that. I just need the $1,400."
Well, my dad had raised me to kind of think that anything that came from the government was evil.
Right.
And so I had this horrible toothache, and I didn't have the money to fix it. And my roommate, and the pastor, kind of the bishop's kind of like a pastor of Mormon. Bishop was like, "You should just get a Pell Grant. This is so apparent that you should do this." And I wouldn't because of all the ways I'd been raised and the beliefs I had. And but he kept convincing me, and the toothache was pretty painful. And eventually, I did. I applied for this Pell Grant, and it came. For 2 semesters, it was $4,000, and I freaked out and called the woman and tried to get her to take it back and send me $1,400 because I thought that my soul would be less at risk. And she thought that I was insane. But then so I had to keep it, which was great. I just had to keep all this money, and it, that really changed my life. Like, that just suddenly I bought I bought books for my classes. I quit one of my jobs. I had my tooth fixed.
You wrote that it freed you, or maybe I'm reading into it. It freed you and allowed you to focus on school.
Yeah, I took classes I didn't need to take because I was interested in them, and I really think that was the first semester I actually bought the books for my classes. Yeah.
I heard you say it's the first time you felt like a student.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I think money. It's one of those things. If you don't have it, it matters a whole lot.
Oh yeah. I noticed that you recommend at the end of the book a lot of resources, and a number of them focus on trauma. And trauma is, a word that some people only associate with things like veterans, and others say is overused. But how is it in relation to, how could somebody suffer a trauma in relation to a family situation, and how is
how
yours?
could you not? It probably is overused, but I don't know. I mean, it's one of those words that could mean a lot of things. We say something's traumatic all the time. Sometimes we mean it's traumatic, and sometimes we mean it wasn't nice. And Yeah, I don't know. It's how could you suffer trauma in a family? That's such a big question. Can you narrow that down for me more?
Yeah. What exactly in your specific situation
Was
did
traumatic?
you look back on as traumatic? Just
Oh my goodness. You know, your ideas about your life. Well, I'm gonna start with that list. What made me put that list there? So I wrote this book, and what made me write it was I had become estranged from my family, and I confronted my dad about one of my older brothers who was violent, and his violence was pretty well documented. It wasn't like, it was not a particularly well-kept secret, and I didn't think that it would be such a big deal when I talked to my dad about it, but it was a very big deal. And they said I was lying, and then it was kind of the end of my relationship with a lot of my family. I had a couple people in my family who stood by me, but by and large, they didn't. And that was clarity. If I had clarity around that. I didn't always have clarity around my brother. I loved my brother. I also was afraid of my brother. I was very confused about that relationship. But I had clarity around the fact that I shouldn't have been disowned for telling my dad about it. That I was like, that's not good. That shouldn't happen. So I wrote this book to try to fit my life together and make sense of it, and also because I thought if I'm having this experience, other people are having this experience. And I felt at the time that there were a lot of polarized narratives about families. You know, there was like people who wrote memoirs that grew up in dysfunction, who really didn't like their families at all and were very angry, and they would write about it. And then there were a lot of idealized, I grew up singing in the woods, holding hands, and everything's wonderful memoirs. But I felt like I wanted a story of someone who's like, I love my family very much, they're so great, and I need to get away from them. And that's where I was. You know, I really did love them, and I needed to get away from them. That was becoming clear to me. And I would say it was an evolution, you know. At the time I wrote the book, I think I really only had clarity about my brother and the process by which I'd been estranged from them. I had clarity that that was dysfunctional. But, you know, I've had a lot of work to do to figure out not only, like, why did we not go to school? Was it really an ideology, or is it that my dad is really controlling? And at the time I wrote the book, I was just like, no, it was just a belief system. And now I would say, no, it was an obsession with control. My dad is really into control. And he didn't want us to go to school with a doctor because he liked to control everything. And I would say my understanding of my upbringing is still evolving. Like, it changes all the time. And I think that that's healthy in general. Like, I think you want to be examining your life. The reason I put that list, and it's on my website, and it's in the back of the book, and it's because so many people who read my book come to me with stories of various shapes, you know, and they're looking for answers. They want to know what they should do, and I have absolutely no idea what they should do, you know. But I know that what they're looking for is out there, you know. Like, there are answers out there, and somebody else's answer might be different from my answer, and their dad or their brother might have some of the attributes that my brother has, but they might also have other attributes that mean that there's something there you can work through, you know, or they might not. And it might be a, like, save yourself kind of situation, you know, Mary Oliver, the only life you can save, get out. It might be, I don't know. But I do know that there's a lot of smart people who've been thinking about this for a long, long time. And so I have a note on that page that basically it says, like, you know, get these books, go to a library, pick up, read 5 pages. If it speaks to you, keep reading. If it doesn't, close it. Find the next one. Like, there's lots of books in the world and lots of smart people. And what helped me might not help someone else.
It's a great list of resources, and I was really glad you put them there because your story is filled with a lot of traumatic events. And I'm just glad that people are now recognizing that, you know, it's a bigger picture than just what people used to think trauma was.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to. I think it can be tempting to take really obviously traumatic stories. And my dad's junkyard was pretty traumatic. It was not OSHA approved, and my brother was pretty traumatic. I mean, he was a terrifying guy, but I've also seen people I've gotten to know people pretty well who had families that seemed very functional. There weren't obvious signs that anything was wrong, but you get close enough and you see it, like there's pain here, and you don't have to have like a crazy, sheer, insane, kept out of school, no doctors, no birth certificate. Like there's actually quite a lot of suffering and pain in the world, and a lot of it is unspoken, and some of it's even unseen by the people who are experiencing it. And I think I would rather cast the word trauma slightly too wide than leave somebody out of it, I guess, overall.
Definitely, yeah.
Just some questions I'm going to try to group together here on the theme of family. Carolyn asks, have the feelings of any of your family members changed from the time of publication until now?
Oh, for sure. I think for most members of my family, the way they feel about my having written the book can change between 10:05 and 10:07. It's a micro weather climate. But in some of them in big ways. I had some siblings who were very supportive, and through the writing and the fact checking and the publishing, and then when it became a bestseller, they freaked out. They were not okay with that, and I get it. It's a weird thing to have happen to you. So I understand why that would be hard for them. I'm trying to think if there's anything interesting or useful. The way families hold on to a secret is really interesting and variable and often very painful. As I said, my brother's issues with kind of his violent tendencies, I don't know how else to describe it, was not a very well kept secret, but for some members of my family, and actually I would say almost all the members of my family, to speak openly about it, so painful for them for so many reasons, and they would just really, really rather not do it. And so, there's a lot of reasons for that.
You had mentioned that the schism or the divide, some of you have doctorates and some never left high school and stayed home. Is that divide still how it is?
Yeah, none of us went to school. I had one brother who went, for some reason, my oldest brother was able to go to a lot of school. He never graduated from high school, but he attended a lot, and nobody else did, so I don't know how he did that. But nobody in my family graduated from high school, and most of us never went at all. And then I had this one brother, my brother Tyler, who was like freakishly intelligent, freakish in the best way, but he just taught himself trigonometry, taught himself calculus, algebra, he just taught himself everything. Packed himself off to college, did fantastically well, just super smart, crazy smart guy. And came back and talked me into following him to the same university, and then me and Tyler then convinced our brother Richard to go. So you have this very strange situation where once we got to school, we took it like all the way. So I never graduated from high school, but I got a PhD, and my brothers got PhDs. So we have 3 PhDs, and not a single high school diploma. Not any one. So you've got this very strange situation where most of my siblings, I would say many of my siblings have like a 2nd or 3rd grade education, and then you've got us 3 where we just really overcompensated. It's a strong divergence. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. It's weird.
So I'm staying, I guess, on the education theme. Matea asks, or states she's in the audience, or he, I'm not sure, in the audience with 26 AP high school students considering college. What advice would you give them as they determine what they would like to do after high school?
Oh, interesting. I'd say give yourself a little time to decide, I think. Take classes that interest you. I think you have to be practical. The world requires a certain amount of practicality, but you don't want to, it's worth finding out what makes you get out of bed in the morning. I mean, one of the hardest things to do, I think, is find out what makes you want to get out of bed in the morning and what you actually like to do, and paying attention to what those things are. And maybe what gets you out of bed in the morning is like finger painting, but maybe you're actually really bad at it and you have to keep looking for something that you love and also that you're able to do. I could love mathematics, but I should not be a mathematician. And yeah, I think, you know, the world is changing a lot, and I don't think you can try to outsmart it and figure out what's going to be valuable in 5-10 years. It's very hard to know what the world's going to be like in 5 or 10 years. So I think a good defensive strategy is to remain curious, you know, and learn as much as you can, and just don't kill off your curiosity by forcing your brain to only do things it doesn't want to do. Like, you'll just kill off any desire you have to do anything.
Have you received feedback from any young Mormons?
I have received lots of feedback.
How has that been?
You know, I feel like how do I say this? Like, I'm not Mormon anymore, so that's, and I had my reasons for leaving the church, but I also love the church, and I'm very grateful to the church, so I can kind of talk to just about any person on that spectrum of Mormon, ex-Mormon, former Mormon, and have a lot of sympathy. You know, the church was a great community for me, and there's a lot of things. I'm so grateful I was raised religious, actually. I mean, there's things that I feel like the secular world hasn't, you know, why you value another human being, even if you disagree with everything they stand for, you know, and I think religion has a great answer to that. Like, they're a child of God, and they have inherent worth, and the secular world hasn't answered that yet, really. And yeah, there's amazing things about religion. BYU saved me. I'm so grateful for that university. But at the same time, it was articulating a version of God that didn't feel right to me, and so I couldn't stay. But so yeah, I receive all kinds of feedback, but I feel like I tried to be very respectful. I don't feel like my family. I don't think my dad was the way he was because of religion. You know, he couched it in those terms, but I think it was a mental health issue, brain health issue, and I think he used religion. But I don't think that if you removed Mormonism, suddenly my dad would have not had his issues. That wouldn't have happened.
You have a passage, just speaking of interaction with the bishop, that I think is so beautiful. It's one of my favorite passages in the book. Just an example of dealing with an authority figure who is a religious authority figure, and of all the bad things we hear. And I want to read a little of that. To me, he was patriarch with authority over me, but he seemed to surrender that authority the moment I passed through the door. I talked and he listened, drawing the shame from me like a healer draws infection from a wound. I just love that because it just shows how an authority figure can be the right kind.
Yeah, and you don't know people, you know. I mean, he was a Mormon bishop. I remember he would get up and give talks about how important it was for marriage. I think if you'd asked him, he would have said a woman should stay at home. Like, he had traditional Mormon ideas, you know. But when I had my tooth problem, and I had this great plan. I was going to drop out of college, and I was going to hitchhike to Las Vegas, where my brother was a trucker, my brother Tony, and I was going to work at the In-N-Out Burger till I got enough money to fix my tooth. This was my plan, because I needed somewhere to live, because I was like, if I have to pay rent while working, I'm never going to get enough money to fix this tooth. So this was my great scheme, and my roommate found out about it and told this bishop, and he was just like, I cannot allow you to leave school over this toothache. Like, this is stupid. And so I don't know, you don't, there's a way where you might have a stereotype of someone like that, like not caring about, you know, women's education or whatever, but very few people fit the stereotype that, you know, so he was incredible. I'm so grateful to him. He was the first adult in my life, I would say, who really took an interest, and I had so much of that. I've had so much luck in my life with people helping me, and he was kind of the first, very significant.
Do you stay in touch?
I think I've written him on Facebook a few times over the years, you know. I'm not on Facebook as much as I used to be, but yeah, occasionally, yeah, I do email him occasionally.
Another question. In your view, this is from Tricia, what's the difference between formal education and true knowledge? How has your understanding of this evolved through your experiences?
These are intense.
I'll look for some lighter ones.
Formal education and true knowledge. I feel like we're going to be getting Plato out here. Formal education and true knowledge.
You can drop back 10 and punt if you want.
Sorry, punt?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's too much. I used to have a good answer to this question. I don't remember what it is. I mean, I used to have this whole thing about arrogance in education, and I do think that some, especially because often education is associated with class and it takes on a lot of attributes of culture, where the people who have an education have a certain set of attributes and beliefs and the people who don't, and they think that the education and the beliefs they have are completely logical, but not necessarily. Some of that is just culture, and some of it is logic and some of it's culture. But I do think, as someone who grew up in a very small town and very religious and didn't have a lot of exposure to ideas and opportunities, but then went to Cambridge and went to Harvard, I've been kind of astonished in my life at how many very educated people are fundamentally incurious, you know, and they often let their education kind of putrefy into arrogance, and they can meet another person and not actually have a lot of interest about who that person is. And I thought this a lot when you look at the political division, and I think that there's a way that people on the left want to understand why the people on the right do things that to them are just incomprehensible. And I think there's a tendency to only look at people through that political prism. Like the whole thing of their lives is that they cast their vote one way, and you look at their whole life through that shape. And most people's lives to themselves, that's not the most important thing they've ever done. You know, they have a lot of other things. And, so I guess I think that there's like a curiosity that I think should come with education and knowledge that makes you want to know more and ask more questions and talk less. And sometimes I think a formal education leads to less listening, less curiosity, which is not.
That's funny, because one of the things I had written down here was I read something in the Topanga News Times. They were contrasting your book with J.D. Vance's book.
No fun.
The writer, she quoted you that you wrote, "A skill you were learning was a crucial one, the patience to read things I could not yet understand." And she wrote, in contrast, and perhaps best illuminating our differences today, one of these authors seems to lay claim to deep knowledge of how the world works, while the other approaches life with curiosity and open-mindedness. Unfortunately, only one of these worldviews leaves one able to handle challenges to old ways of thinking when confronted with new information. It speaks to what you just said.
Well, clearly I'm superior.
I'm going to dive back into a little bit of the family. Julie had a question. We read instances where your mother acted in ways that your father would agree with or disagree with, buying you a leotard so you could go to dance class on one hand, but being a midwife on the other. Do you think your mother had conflicting beliefs with your father, or did she act in accordance with his values?
When I was younger, my mother had much more of her own mind, and she would find little ways, like one of my brothers just had a lot of depression, and he was really lonely, and that was manifesting in ways that were really worrying. And so my mom decided that it was important for us kids to get out and not just, you know, be isolated all the time. And my dad wouldn't let us go to school, so my mom found these like dance classes over in town. But my dad wouldn't let us go because the teacher would only let us go if we wore like the spandex leotards, and my dad wouldn't let us do that. And so my mom told my dad that she changed her policy and that we could wear jeans and t-shirts, and she did not.
You just left the house.
No, she bought us the stuff, and we hid them, and we put them under our clothes, and that's how we did it. And when I was little, she did a lot of stuff like that. And then as I got older, she did less and less. And I think I would just, it's it's hard to pass judgment on anybody else's relationship, and you never know somebody else's marriage, you're not in it, but I feel like my dad is a pretty mentally abusive person, and I think that my mother has been living with him so long. I feel like when I was younger, she had a sphere that was her sphere, more or less, a kind of little area of autonomy, and it wasn't very big, but she found ways, and I haven't seen that in a really long time, and it's maybe a warning, I think, of sometimes if you think that a relationship you're in is like a little bit dysfunctional, but probably okay, that don't just think of it now, like think of it in 20 years, you know, because when I was a kid, their marriage was less disturbing than it is to me now, actually, where it feels more like a mature dysfunction, where I would say my mom doesn't have her own ideas in the same way that she used to. She parrots my dad, and yeah, when I was younger, there was just a lot more. She had her ideas, and she subverted him in all kinds of ways rather than deal with it, but now she doesn't.
Part of that could have just been, or maybe is still currently a coping mechanism, a survival mechanism to you know, to live with your father if he, in fact,
I'm
does
sure
have
it's a
bipolar
survival
disease,
mechanism.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's a coping.
I'm sure it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Do you still communicate with your mom?
You know, I don't. I thought I always would. I think I even said in the book I always would, so sorry. I did. I always thought we emailed more or less once or twice a month, and we did it. My goodness, we did it for so long, and I think it was maybe about a year ago. They found this journalist to write this article, another article about how I was lying about my brother, and they just know I'm not. They just know it. Like, if you put my brother's name and birthday into the Idaho court system, you get an assault and battery charge. Like, it's not complicated, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't even know the story of that. I don't know who filed that. But there's many, many women, former girlfriends. It's just not. And I don't know why. For some reason, maybe it was I did a lot of therapy recently, and I just felt like I don't know if I need this. I don't know if I need to keep reaching after this when this is what comes back. And it was a really hard decision, and but yeah, I just one day stopped responding, and I feel like it was the right thing for me. I'm sure it was, but again, I don't think it's necessarily the right thing for everybody. But I felt like this is doing me harm. It's not going to change, and I was just ready to let it go.
Might be a difficult question to answer, but do you hold some resentment toward your mother for maybe not?
Well, I'm not a robot. So.
Not protecting you when all that was going on.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, in some ways, I think I resent her more than my brother or my dad, which I think is kind of crazy. I really think it's kind of nuts, but it's the truth, and I think sometimes we resent the people that we have higher expectations for the most, and I don't think I ever had any expectations of my dad or my brother, really, but my mother I had expectations for, and you know, and now I think those expectations were probably very healthy. Like, they probably they probably were protective in a way that I expected her to be more supportive or stand up for me with my dad and my brother. But yeah, I have more resentment towards her than I do even towards my brother I call Sean in the book. And I don't defend that as rational. It just is what it is.
Well, I think too, you know, both of them, you know, having great health issues, there's obviously something going wrong there that they don't, you know, have full control over. So maybe in some ways, you know, she didn't suffer from brain health issues, that you had those expectations maybe that, you know, that they were, I don't want to say excused because of those things, but they just maybe weren't capable because of the brain health issues.
It's hard to know. Like,
yeah.
I would assume my mother must have the reasons that she married my dad, the reasons that she went along with this pretty extreme ideology. I would assume she had her own struggles and battles. I don't know, I would assume she did what she was capable of.
Yeah.
But it's somehow, yeah, it's very odd. I have way more resentment towards her than I.
Did her becoming...
But I have more love towards her too. It's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
conflicted, strange.
Yeah, both can be true.
Was there any connection to the head injury she sustained and
the
timing
accident.
of, when she was less of an independent woman?
Not in an obvious way. In fact, she was becoming a midwife around the time that car accident happened, and she hit her head, and she, became a very competent, independent midwife. She had her own money. She formed her own herbal business that did very, very well. I mean, in a strange way, she carved out her own life in a huge way. But if you look up that business today, my mother does not own it. And you can guess who owns it. And if you order something from the company, which I've done, it comes with my dad's name on it. My mom's absent from it. She runs it. She does all the work, and they're all her recipes and her, but she doesn't own it. He owns it. And it comes with his name on it, not hers. So, yeah, and it makes, my mother's business became very big and very successful, dwarfed anything my father ever achieved, but you wouldn't know that.
Is that, both your mother's upbringing, because her upbringing seemed to be, she needed to dress like perfectly all the time, right? And that, her life with your father was a bit of a departure from that. And then,
A bit.
And then your own father's upbringing with a violent father and mother who worked. There's maybe do you think there was some resentment of his mother having that job, and that's why he, it's kind of taking your mother's identity or hard work in his own name because he's...
I don't know. My dad always had a very fractious relationship with his mother, but the nature of that I've never understood. I can't hypothesize about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know my grandfather also had some physical. He had some violent tendencies when my dad was younger, and that wasn't a secret. Everybody knew that. And I don't know. Maybe it was because he resented his mother for not intervening. I don't know. I don't know what made my dad the way he was. I couldn't. In college, I got very interested in bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, and I thought, oh, this would explain a lot. But I don't know. You don't necessarily know. I now see my dad as a much more lonely figure. I think. I sometimes think he doesn't necessarily. I think the paranoia that he feels and the need for control over people. I wonder if he was. I don't know, he just seems very solitary to me in a way that no matter how, proximity doesn't seem to help, to people. And he could keep all his kids home on the mountain and keep them from having friends and teachers, but I think he was still pretty much alone. And now he just, when I think of him now, when I wrote the book, he seemed more like a tyrant, and I was very angry with him, and I'm still probably really angry with him, but I also just feel like he's a very lonely person.
When you wrote the book, there wasn't things like Reiki and energy healing and crystals and...
We did all of it.
We did all of it before
We did all of
it
it.
was trendy to do all of it. So when that started becoming part of the zeitgeist, what was your reaction?
I mean, no reaction. I don't care. People can treat their illnesses any way they want, as long as when you hit the red zone, you go to the doctor. Before you die, you should just go to the emergency room. We never perfected that maneuver. The problem I think with my parents isn't that they believe all these weird things, although they do, but it's that they disbelieve in all the things that could actually save your life. And so my concern with alternative medicine, some of it is great, and there are things that work and we don't know why, and I'm very comfortable putting my trust in things that we don't totally understand why they work. That's fine. But I get anxious when people have a life-threatening condition or something goes seriously wrong and be like, I've got lavender, you're covered. Whatever.
Although it's funny, it's amazing everyone survived these injuries.
People are hard to kill in some ways. It wasn't for lack of trying. No, there were, all jokes aside, there were very serious injuries. And it was crazy. And I think the only thing that makes me feel better about it at all is that the worst injury that probably anybody experienced was my dad. I mean, we all had our turn, but I think you could just say, oh, this is a sadistic, crazy man trying to kill his kids, and I wouldn't rule that out. But he really believed it, because he also was, decided to remove this fuel tank from this car, because the car crusher won't take it has a fuel tank. You all need to know this. And, most sane people would either remove the belts, get some tools, remove the belts, get the tank off, or maybe you puncture the tank and drain the fuel out. You have a lot of options. But he decided it was probably fine to use a cutting torch with the tank half full of gas, which if it had been totally full of gas, it might have been okay, but like half full is bad. And of course the car explodes and he's burned so badly. He doesn't get out of bed, I think for like a year maybe. The first couple of months my mom kept him hydrated with enemas. This is not a joke, because he'd swallowed flames so he couldn't drink. So this was how they hydrated him. And my mother, who had fully taken on my father's ideology by then, called the hospital and begged them to send morphine. And the hospital was like, we will send a helicopter, we will send an ambulance, but no, we're not going to give you just morphine, So, but we offered thousands of times to take him to the hospital, because you can imagine the pain of that kind of burn, and he would not go. He would not. There was a sincerity to what he believed, and he suffered more than anybody. And he told me, I've heard him say, and I've seen him do it. He said, well, I have no problem doing that again. God wanted that to happen. He wouldn't let it happen twice. I've seen him take a cutting torch with his mangled hands and take a torch and remove a fuel tank. Since the accident, after the fact, I've seen him do it. So, it's not all, there's something going on there. Beyond maliciousness or unconscious sadism. There's something else happening.
Sure. Avi asks, one of the things I'm struck by most in your book is you're grappling with the idea of truth. And how do we know that our perception of events in our lives are true? How has your own idea of truth evolved in the time since you wrote Educator?
A lot. It's changed quite a bit, and it's a strange thing actually to be talking about a book you wrote 7 years ago. For that reason, because you change. And I think at the time, because I had spent so many years knowing something had happened and then having my siblings say, oh, that happened, but it means something else, and all of it, there was an awful lot of gaslighting in the conventional sense. And I think a lot of the reason I wrote the book was to just try to pin things down, organize the story, go through the journals, figure out what had happened, and just get one story. And I was much more obsessed with objective truth, I think, when I wrote the book, because I'd been told so much that I was, crazy. And I don't know now, I think when I wrote the book, I had a very factual understanding of my life. This happened, and I had it in order. And I think what I didn't have is a kind of experiential sense of my life. I don't think I had a very strong connection to the person that had those experiences, if that makes sense. I had a good factual understanding, but I don't think I had a felt memory of what it was like to grow up in that house. And now I've done a lot of reading, and I understand that's actually a very common response to growing up as a child in a dysfunctional family. There's many strategies that people use to deal with it, but one of them is that you kind of intellectualize the experience, and maybe you remember everything that happened, but you have no feelings about it at all. And I would say for almost everything that had happened to me, I had this kind of intellectual understanding that my brother was messed up and that my parents were trying to cover it up, and that's why I'd been disowned. I understood that, and it was very factual and logical. But I was kind of cut off from a lot of the other experiences. Even when I wrote the book, I was very cut off from them. And you can function that way for a while. It doesn't age well. Eventually, you probably want to do something to correct that. But I would say I wrote the book without correcting it. I wrote it from a very intellectual place, and I would do it differently now.
Looking back at your childhood, is there a particular moment that stands out as a turning point in your journey towards self-knowledge? This is from Catherine. Because I know there was I read it recently, I took a lot of notes. There seemed to be so many points that you're like, okay, you kind of knew that you were making your choices along the way, certain events. But was there one that stands out to you?
I think when my brother Tyler told me to go to college, and he was very clever about it, because he knew that if he said, "Oh, go to college so you can become like educated and get a doctorate and write a book," I would have stared at him in deep confusion. But instead, he was very clever. He knew I really liked music. He knew I really liked singing, and I wanted to be the choir director of the church. I was like, if I can be the choir director, that'd be so great. And if I could teach voice lessons, that'd be so great. And he was like, where you can learn to do that is Brigham Young University. And I was like, okay, how do I get there? And he's like, well, you just have to learn algebra, and here's a book, and call me if you have any problems. And I was working for my dad, and I had to get up at 6 in the morning, spend 2 hours trying to teach myself algebra so that I could take the ACT, which don't make that your first test ever, by the way. But I did it because I was like, I really like to sing, and I really like to sing. So, that's why I was saying finding out what you like and what wakes you up and what you're drawn to. Just finding out what you're drawn to. You can't see 20 years in front of you. Nobody can. All you can do is pursue the things that animate you in any given moment. And I was animated by music. I could not have possibly been animated by literature or even history at that point. I never heard of the civil rights movement. Like, I was not going to get a PhD in history, but I really liked choir. So I taught myself algebra because I like to sing. And I went to college. And then once I was there, I was taking these classes, and history turned out to be really interesting, and I liked it, and then I liked books, and I liked reading, and then I got disowned, and I went to Cambridge. I was like, I'll just write a book, that makes sense. And then I did, and I came here. And the whole story. And I think I could not have gotten to the end from the beginning. It wouldn't make any sense, actually. You couldn't have possibly architected that trip. But, he did it very cleverly. He was like, go to college so you can, study music. And I did do that.
I listened to a commencement address you gave, and you said faith was the rock you built your life on, and now that rock was turning to sand. Has anything replaced that rock?
Oh, like the way that my dad's religion? No. I mean, would you want it to? I grew up in a very extreme, not even Mormonism, I grew up in a much more extreme religion than Mormonism. I mean, Mormons go to school and they go to the doctor and they have birth certificates, and we didn't have any of that. And it was a really, really strict, dramatic belief system. And my dad was talking to God every day and telling us the latest, commandment. And no, I have nothing in my life, and I hope I never do again, have anything in my life that comes in with that kind of certainty and sense of being ruled, so no.
Heather writes, we are high school teachers that use your text in a class called Survival in the Contemporary World. We ask students, what makes Tara a survivor? What's your answer?
Humor? I don't have any idea. That's really tough. You guys are tough. I'm used to much easier questions than this. I don't know. Survivor makes me think of the word resilience, which people love the word resilience. And how do we be resilient? How do we make people resilient? You're so resilient. And I once was on the phone with one of the books I recommend, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I was on the phone with Bessel van der Kolk, and he said the funniest thing. He hadn't read my book, but he'd read about it. And he said, I bet you've got a lot of people telling you that you're resilient. And I said, yeah, I do have that. And he said, You never know if someone is resilient until you're married to them. I just thought it was the most amazing, true thing. Anyway, I have no idea, but apparently you have to be married to someone to know if they're resilient.
That's true.
I think it is true. I think it's the people closest to you. They see, like they see the stuff you're not dealing with. They see where you put it, and they see where you refuse to look at it. They know. You don't know, but they know. The people close to you, they know exactly where it is. Yep.
Well, an easier question. You once mentioned that there was talk of the book being turned into a movie. Is there still talk of that?
It's a very unpopular answer, but I never sold the film rights. Only one person thinks that's I talked to absolutely everybody, and I was told I had to sell them by absolutely everybody, and one day I realized I didn't have to sell them, and that there was no reason to, really, and so I didn't. Yeah, a very weird, controversial decision. I still think it's feasible one day to do it, but I don't feel like I'm in any hurry, and the book did fine without a movie, and I feel like a movie is a big risk. Like a good movie about your life is not necessarily going to improve your life, but a bad movie about your life would ruin your life. and the visual cortex is so powerful, I just feel like it might actually overpower the book, and it might become the thing instead of the book. And I feel like it'd be very easy to reduce that story to something trite and the opposite of what it actually is. It'd be so easy to do it. It'd be much easier to do that than do it correctly the way that I would want it to be done, and I just decided not to do it at all.
I was going to say you would have to have significant control over.
Even though I'm not a filmmaker, I think I'd make a huge mess. So.
Question from Quincy. What was it like navigating many different social environments after leaving home? What did you learn from those experiences?
So easy, no problems at all. No, I mean, it was a mess. I made a lot of mistakes. I made a lot of people uncomfortable, especially myself. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm fairly socially competent now, but I do have some strange tics. I'm aware of it. Like, I'm overly sincere in a way that there's a lot of rules that I have either never learned, or even when I figured out what they were, I was just like, I don't need that. And like, if I like somebody, I will just say, hey, I would like to be your friend. Like, this is just a strategy that I have developed. I started doing it when I was 17. Can we be friends? And it works a lot of the time. You would be amazed how much that just works.
Take the guesswork out of it, right?
Sorry?
Takes the guesswork out.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always work. Sometimes they're like, no, thank you. But a lot of the times it actually works. And then they're not weird. You call them and they expect you to call them because you said you're going to. And I don't know. I had a lot of disasters, and I also had a lot of just really good experiences. I mean, that was one of the great things, was leaving my upbringing and my immediate family and realizing the world outside is different, actually. It's just different, and in a lot of good ways.
You wrote a beautiful essay for the New Yorker on your trip to India.
Yeah.
Which I'd love you to talk a little bit about that, and a woman, that you stayed with.
Yeah, it was a year after I was, became estranged from my parents, and I was pretty much just lost at sea. I mean, I had no idea really what had happened. I hadn't processed it. I was in shock. I was still trying to just fix things somehow, and that wasn't working out because my dad wanted me to say that I had lied and made it up. And I was perfectly, I mean, at the time I wouldn't make this deal now, but at the time I was like, I will never mention this again. Can we just forget about it? And for my dad, he wanted me to say that I had lied, and I wouldn't do that, so we were stuck. And I was just lost, and my friend, one of my best friends at Cambridge, his name was Sukrit, grew up in Delhi. We had nothing in common. He grew up in this fancy family and went to Princeton, and just totally different background. But somehow we were best friends in Cambridge, and we hung out all the time. And he randomly was like, go to India and hang out with my mom for a while. And I don't know, at first I said no, and then a year later he said it again, and I was like, okay, and I went to India, and I lived with his mother for like 6 weeks. And his mother was this incredibly powerful bureaucrat in the IAS service, like the officer service in India, the bureaucracy, and she was an incredible woman. I mean, she'd run elections in Afghanistan. She had been the chief electoral officer in Delhi. I mean, she was just this force. And I got to go spend time with this woman, and I had so many experiences like that of like finding family in very unlikely places. You know, just two people could not be contrived to a more different than me and Sucre, you know, but we found each other in Cambridge, and we became really good friends. And then his mother became very important to me also.
Yeah,
And
it's lovely.
you had something in common of sorts, right? She had a very difficult decision to make in divorcing her husband and not knowing what was to come. And that was one of your questions, like, how did you know? How did you do it? How did you know it was going to be okay?
And she did.
She basically said
Yeah,
she didn't.
she's like, I didn't. I had no idea this was going to. She's in India. She's a very prominent public person, and she felt like she had to get out of this marriage because it was unhealthy. And everybody basically told her, you cannot do that. This was a while ago. This wasn't even recent. You know, you can't. And she did. And she had a very. There's lots of different kinds of strength, you know, and she had a kind of strength that I didn't have, but she was, I think, trying to teach me that I had a kind of strength that was much more brittle, like white knuckle, put everything you don't want to think about in the closet and move forward. That was how I did things. And she had a much more enduring, kind of wiser kind of strength that I was trying to learn from. I didn't really, but later I would understand it.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful because she gave herself permission to fall apart, and there's a big strength in that, and it seemed that it gave you permission to do the same.
You know, I have to say, the piece kind of ends on a negative, not negative note, but like she's offering me something very valuable that I can't take because I'm not ready and I don't know what she's saying. I don't even understand it. But now I understand it. At the time, I didn't understand it. You know, it kind of makes me think about, I had these roommates in college, and I'm going to use a trigger word here, so I apologize in advance, but I had this roommate in college. When I first got to BYU, I had this roommate, and she came running in, and she was crying, she was really upset, and I guess she'd gone on a date, or maybe it wasn't a date, but there's some guy who said something kind of mean to her, and she was very upset. And I had been watching all my roommates. I just barely left my family, and I had become aware that like these are healthy people, and I had this kind of sense like I'm not totally okay. Like I knew that. I was having nightmares. I was having a lot of PTSD. I knew I wasn't okay, and I was kind of systematically trying to watch them and figure out what the difference was between them and me. And this was one of my first memories of just being totally confused because, as far as I could tell, she had like a paper cut. She was just completely coming apart, you know. And I remember, you know, my older brother that I had this really dysfunctional relationship. He had a name for me that was, when he got really angry at me, he would call me whore. And I was like, how can she be upset? I think this guy had like criticized her hair or something, and she just like, there was a little puddle on the floor. And I was just like thinking to myself, it's like the difference between me and Jenny is if someone called Jenny a whore, she would cry, and I feel nothing. I don't react to that in any way. It doesn't even touch me. It doesn't reach me. And it was the first time I thought there's a lot of forms of strength that you can have, and some of those forms are injuries, actually. And I think this woman, her name is Madam Betty in India, was trying to tell me something similar. Like, not all forms of strength are strength. Some of them are injuries.
Do you think that's why Sucre mentioned or suggested you go? Because he thought she may have some wisdom to impart on you? Whether
I don't
you
know.
could
I would
receive it or
imagine.
not?
I've never asked him. He must have. It's such a bizarre thing to do, to tell your friend to go live with her mother in another country for 6 weeks. Yeah, it must have been something like that.
Let's see. Is there anything you wish you had written in your book that you admitted, or is there anything you wish you could change about the book? And do you have any plans on a second book?
No, and yes. I mean, I'm so glad I'm not able to change the book, because I would change everything in the book, and then it would be a different book, and that book wouldn't be anymore, and that doesn't make any sense. Let me start over. I think I wanted to write that book at that moment because it was a moment of confusion for me. It was that thing I said before. I think a lot of times when people write about their families, they're more settled, and I wasn't. I was super ambivalent about my decision to become estranged, to stay estranged. I had a lot of regret. I had a lot of internal conflict around the fact that I'd lost my family, and I kind of feel like it's complete in that moment. I wouldn't change it, because a lot of times when people are struggling with that decision, that's where you are when you're struggling. Like you're full of the ambivalence. Now I don't have a lot of ambivalence. When I think about the fact that I am not going to go back to Idaho, I have moments I'm sad, and I have moments I miss my family, but I mostly feel relieved. I'm much more settled in that, and if I wrote that book now, it would be very different, and it would be a totally different book. So I think it exists at that moment the way that it was. I always knew that I would look back on it in 10, 20 years and think, oh, look at all these things I got wrong, or the writing isn't good, or whatever. I mean, but it's a product of a moment, and it's a snapshot of really in the immediate years after I became estranged from my family. I wouldn't trust myself to change it, really. I think if I want to change it, I just have to write another book. And I am writing another book. I've been stuck for a while. It's a bit of a sore spot. I don't know if you noticed. You poked it first thing. This is good intuition. No, it's actually fine now, because I've been really, really struggling with this book I've been writing, and I finally figured out it's because it's actually two books, and if I pull it apart, it's two simple books instead of one unbelievably complicated, confusing book that even I don't understand. So I'm finally making some progress with it, but it's, I do think there's a meaningful way you can tell the story once, and I wouldn't try to tell that story again, but I would say there are more stories to be told, because there's a way. I think Educated is a book that's largely about how you leave a place physically, like, go get an education. And then after I'd written it and published it, I noticed I was drawn to a lot of the same kind of characters. Adam Phillips has this quote, "You can change places in a way that you can't change histories." And it is possible to recreate the kind of dysfunction I grew up with in New York City, and I was very good at it. And so then I became interested in how do you leave mentally and physically? Like, how do you not just build the same life in a new place? And that's a different story. It'll involve some of the same stories, but it's a different story. And but it's just a different thing. I wouldn't change Educated necessarily, because that is what it belongs to that time that it was written, and I shouldn't change it. If I ever say I'm changing it, tell me not to.
Things you've written since then, I will say, have been showing that evolution.
The few that there are, yes.
The many. There's a lot. It was wonderful.
I would say the person who wrote Educated would not have written that Madame Betty piece. Wouldn't have even understood it. I can say that with certainty.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's clearly an evolution.
Yeah, I had a very intellectual, I wouldn't have understood even what I was talking about. So, you try to grow throughout your life, you try to change, but it doesn't mean that I would change that book. I wouldn't change that book. I wouldn't write that book again, but I wouldn't change it.
Do you think your parents protected Sean because he was a man, or because of his brain health issues? But they have protected your other brothers that way?
Well, they definitely didn't. Have not done that. I don't know why they protected. I think they identified with him a lot, and I also think my dad saw him as a risk to the family. I think for my parents, it was very important that it not come out. And I later found out, I didn't know it when I wrote my book, I didn't know, but now I do know that actually I wasn't the first person to come talk to my mom about my brother. I wasn't the first woman to do it. I think, by my math, I think I was fifth person that came to my mom. Maybe fourth, I have to stop. Yeah, maybe I was the fifth person who came to my mom and said, I need your help. And I think, in a way, it was one of those moments of actual clarity that I had where my parents denied it so vigorously when I talked to them. And I think one of the things that helped me actually believe myself was thinking, just knowing if I'd said this about any one of my brothers, any one of them, they would have been worried about me and tried to help me because they would have known it wasn't true. You know, there was a way where if I'd come and been like, Tyler has been so violent and has all these problems, they'd be like, are you okay? Because Tyler's a sweetheart. But it was like, because it was true, I had to be possessed and I had to be, you know, thrown out of the family, and I had, all of these things had to be done to kind of discredit me and all these, and I knew that even when I was writing it, for all of my other blindnesses, I did understand this, they are denying in this way because they know it's true. And if they didn't think it was true, they would not be reacting in the way they're reacting. And I think for my dad, I think it was a control thing. He had said there was nothing, and he had, I think it was about that. I don't fully understand it. I still find it strange that it couldn't just be dealt with.
And he was
To
very
get help.
violent. I'm curious, like in the last, since the book has come out, have there been any other instances, and especially with his wife?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's that assault and battery charge that was a couple years ago, and I have no idea what it is about. But I know, for the most part, it just gets covered up. You know, I mean, it has been that way for a really long time, and my parents are good at it. The lawyer who defended him in that charge is my parents' lawyer. So I don't know, and I wouldn't necessarily hear. You know, I hear things from my other siblings where they see things that worry them, but I don't. Nothing credible, and I'm not there, and I'm grateful I'm not there. So.
Well, there's a lot of questions. We just don't have all the time, unfortunately. Lisa asked, how do I help kids that grew up like you and want an education?
Oh. Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I think that I guess about the people in my town, we were kept pretty separate from the town. Generally, we went to church, but we didn't go to school, so we were kept pretty apart. And there were a few adults in that community that I think made a pretty big difference, and it was just tiny, tiny little things, you know. I remember there was a woman I would babysit for, and she gave me piano lessons, and she was actually, I think, the source of the dance club, because she was like worried for us that we were so isolated. And she was like, oh, you know, my sister teaches this dance class over in town. And then I told my mom, and I think that there were people in the town who took an interest and saw that we were isolated and tried to bring us in. And I think something that I think about now is, I think if people had come at me just criticizing my dad, I can't believe that they raised you like that. I think kids identify so strongly with their parents. I think I just heard that as an attack when people did that on me. But I think the things that really have stayed with me, I remember when I was 15 or 16, there was like a beauty pageant at the high school, and my father would have never allowed me to be a part of that beauty pageant, nor would I have wanted to do it. But I remember there was the same woman I babysat for who taught piano just called one day, I think it was called the Merry Miss Pageant, and said, I would like to sponsor you in the Merry Miss Pageant, you know, and I sort of laughed, I was like, you met my father, like, this will never happen, and hung up with like laughing. But it's funny, I'm 38 years old, I remember that. I remember there was this woman in the town who's like, you should be doing this, and I want to be a part of it, and it was never going to happen. I wouldn't have even wanted to do it, but it was like this adult who's like, you're great, I want to help you. And it's these tiny little things that often make the biggest difference. And then as I got older, it was, you know, professors, and they, very practical things. When my professor said there's a study abroad at Cambridge, you should apply for it, I looked at the price tag and was like, there is no way I'm going to do that. I have been working 3 jobs, getting up at 4 in the morning to not take on debt, and I'm not taking on debt to go to England. Like, I'm not doing it. And he was like, yes, you are, and here are ways to make the debt less, but yes, you are. You know, and the fact that I did that study abroad is how I met Professor Steinberg, is how I got my scholarship to Cambridge. The whole thing followed from this one professor who's like, you cannot afford this. Let me go talk to the finance office and figure out how to make this imaginable to you. And he did. I still left. It still was $5,000 of debt, which terrified me. But it was imaginable. It was an imaginable number. When he got done, the number was imaginable.
I think I've got one more, and then we can do the final.
Okay.
So something you just reminded me of when she was encouraging you to do something, right? I had a question here where Professor Steinberg told you that in his 30 years at Cambridge, you had one of the best essays he'd ever read. And you had written that you tolerated cruelty better than kindness. Praise was poison to you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, at the time, I really didn't know how to deal with. He was very lavish and I think he recognized I'd grown up in a certain environment. He was trying to make up for it, but I just couldn't take it. I didn't have anywhere to put that I didn't know where to put that.
Is it because you weren't used to it? You think? Because you were
I'm just not used to it. I think it's the way my brother. I mean, for some reason, I tried to write about it. It was very hard for me even to articulate at the time. But there was a way where being treated well really reminded me about my brother and not being treated well. For some reason, the two experiences were intimately connected. And when someone was really kind to me, especially a man, it was kind of strange. Like, I knew exactly what to do with aggression. I would have been totally immobile in the face of someone screaming and yelling at me, but someone saying nice things, I really just, I would come apart. It was really, I didn't deal with it well. I'm better at it now, but no, I didn't deal with it well. And I remember that being a really hard thing, but I think, when I think about what that woman did when she called, it was so tiny, but I think one of the reasons that helped so much, she was basically just saying, I see you, you're there, you're a person, I see you, you're part of this town. And we didn't get a lot of that, because we were weird and we were homeschooled and we were wearing ugly clothes and our dad was super aggressive and we were strange and we didn't know how to behave, and all that was true. But then there was just this woman being like, you're here, you are part of this group of kids, and you're invited to be a part of it, even though I'm like, I'm not really, my dad will kill me if I try to enroll in this, but you think I'm real, and that was really important.
I think one really important point you make that I just want to stress is people often, I'm sure, say to you that reconciliation should be the goal. They're your mother, they're your father. And there was, I don't know if you saw it, there was a piece recently in the Times by a writer named Edmond.
Yeah, I missed that.
It reminded me of you. He wrote, when I tell people I've written a book that argues for stepping away from relatives who have done us physical or psychological harm, the most common response is concern, but not necessarily for those of us who step away. Many people worry about family members who are cut off. Isn't that devastating for your relatives? Or isn't no contact kind of drastic? But, according to I think it was a Harris poll last November, they say the proportion of estranged Americans are about 1 in 2 right now. It's more common than it's not. And I think it's just really important to highlight, that it's been the best thing for you.
I think everyone's situation is different, and it's very hard to. I've seen people become estranged in a way that I felt from the outside that I thought, I don't know, this seems like there's a lot here. Like, are you sure you want to give that up? Are you sure it's worth it? And I don't say that from a place of authority, I have no idea. But I've also seen a lot of people who are being significantly mistreated, and it's not going to get better, and it's the right thing. And I also know from my own experience that people can see. I have this absurd chat with one of my brothers. I won't say which one, but it's a chapter I'm hoping to write about at some point. But where we're talking about my family, we're talking about my parents, we're talking about our other brother, the violent one, and he acknowledges everything. He has this amazing paragraph where he describes my brother, who I call Sean, as an emotionally powerful individual who regularly engaged in mild to medium physical abuse and mild to medium sexual abuse. He just goes through the whole thing, and it's kind of a terrifying description. And at the end, he's just like, he's a great guy. We just need to support him, And it's just and it flips, and it just flips into this other place where he's just like, I think if you were more grateful and mentioned his good qualities more, you'd have a better relationship, And the two things just sit next to each other, And in his mind, he wrote me after that so many times, if you were more grateful for what a good person he is, really, you wouldn't have any problem. And I was like, it's just not true. We would have a huge problem.
It's not your fault.
And he's like, you need to mention that he's a really generous person every time you see him. And he is a generous person. He's a very generous person. He's also really violent. And I don't know, it was just very hard for my brothers, I think, to actually just look at it and deal with it. And it's because the costs are very high and they're afraid of my brother. One of my brothers did try to stand up for me with my dad, and my dad threatened to disown him, and my brother threatened to disown him, and it becomes, in a family system that wants to keep the secret, it becomes hard for people to be supportive, and the cost to them is very high. It's much easier for them to just, another one of my brothers, I won't say which one, but when he read the book, said, "This is accurate, I support you publishing it, this happened, you should have the right to tell it." He said, I just have one thing I want you to do. Can you just switch the names and say that I did it? And I said, nobody would believe that. He said, I'll say I did it. So I'll go on TV with you, I'll say it was me. And that's how badly he just wanted to protect either the family, my brother, my dad. It was the only way he could see through. He's like, you need to tell the story and it cannot be told. And that was his answer. Wow.
Well, what a lot of people may not know is that you have a beautiful voice, and Tara's agreed to close us out tonight.
I always sing How Great Thou Art. Just always do. So if that's upsetting to anyone, sorry. I don't know what key it's going to be in, so. Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
Thank you all very much. We'll be right back.
Thank you once again, everybody. Thank you, Dee, Suzy, and Tara. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. So, don't forget, pay in your playbills is the discount code for the Steve Gross event in just a couple